Despite how we treat it on social media and in society, perfectionism is not a personality trait. It's something we've learned over the years to protect ourselves from failure, embarrassment, and criticism. Today's episode is for all the women who have silently struggled with perfectionism because it's way more common than you might think. We're getting into the psychology behind why ambitious women specifically struggle with perfectionism, what it actually means, how it shows up in our lives in sneaky ways, and what you can actually do about it starting today.
This episode is so good. I would just like to say Grace wrote this entire outline while I was out for my wedding, and I pulled it up this morning to prep for the episode, and I was like, wow, this is really good. I also think that the entire premise of this episode is that you might not think you're a perfectionist, but you probably are. We outline all of
Yes.
the different types of perfectionism, how it might show up for you, why that is, and then kind of like how to combat it. So I'm super excited for this episode, but we wanted to start by just kind of sharing how perfectionism shows up for us so that hopefully you can start to get an idea that it might not be what you think. And I think for me, I have become a lot more of a perfectionist as my career goes on. I don't think that I used to struggle with this as much as I do now. And for me, I think the biggest way that it shows up in my career is I notice myself not taking action on ideas as quickly as I used to. I think when I first started in entrepreneurship, content creation, it was very comfortable having an idea and just acting on it quickly. I was putting out multiple videos a day, not caring like what the video quality looked like, or I had a product idea and I would just kind of go after it. But now I think I'm getting to a point where I'm so hyper aware of how I think people are perceiving me that I'm like afraid to share things. I'm afraid to share my opinions. I'm afraid to share my thoughts. I'm afraid to put something out into the universe because what if people don't like it or they think I'm not smart or all of those things, and that is a form of perfectionism. So that's what we're going to talk about in today's episode.
Yeah, you guys know, whenever we get into these kinds of topics, I have such a blast putting together the outlines. Like, this was literally the most fun that I've had on an outline in so long because I also, I consider myself a perfectionist in some ways, but I actually felt like as I grew and as I got older, I became less and less of a perfectionist. But then I was in therapy a couple months ago and my therapist was like, I think you're dealing with some like perfectionist tendencies. Like she was like, don't you sound, that sounds very critical of yourself. It sounds like perfectionism. And she was like, does that resonate? And you guys know I love my therapist. I was like, no, I was like, I don't know, girl. I'm like, I think you're missing the mark on that one. Like, I was like, I
No,
don't know.
you're wrong.
Yeah, like, I was like, I'm not sure. Thank you so much for sharing, but I'm not sure that I really am a perfectionist. But what's funny is shortly after that, I was like, maybe let me explore this idea of perfectionism. And so I started listening to an audiobook called The Perfectionist's Guide to Losing Control. It's available on Spotify if you have like Spotify Premium. And so I started listening to it. I haven't even finished it. I'm only like a couple chapters in. It rocked my world in like the first chapter. And I did pull a lot from that book into today's outline, but it made me realize that I am a perfectionist so much more than I thought I was, because I think we view perfectionism as wanting everything to go well, but there's actually different types of perfectionism, which we will talk about. And that really I had to sit with that, because I've always thought of myself as, no, I just have high standards. I just care about things a lot. But the line between that and perfectionism is very, very blurry. And so the more I started to reflect and learn about perfectionism, the more I realized that certain things I thought were really helpful for me in my career were actually becoming really detrimental and were actually holding me back. And I don't know, I'm just excited for you guys to kind of get that same kind of learning in today's episode because I think it was a big unlock for me and I think it will be a big unlock for a lot of you guys too.
Yeah, I think we all kind of think about perfectionism as the surface level. Like, perfectionism is about needing everything to be perfect. Like, you really want to put your best foot forward in everything that you do,
Mhm.
and you don't want to put something out into the universe until it's perfect. And I think a lot of people don't relate to that. I know I don't relate to that. I'm very
Right.
type B, which always shocks people, but I'm so type B. It's like insane. So I'm so fine with things not being perfect, but there's so much more to it. It's so much deeper than that. And I think the core of this episode is learning that perfectionism really is a form of self protection. Our brain is like trying to keep us safe in everything that we
Mhm.
do. And this is just one version of that. It's not wanting people to perceive you a type of way or not wanting to be judged, not wanting to have that shame. And there's different ways that it shows up in everybody's life, which is what we're going to talk about. But I think that's at its core, it's a form of self protection.
Yes. I like you said, I think that we view because when my therapist said, "Oh, I feel like this you sound like, this is a you're being a perfectionist." I was like, "No, like I know when to let things go. I know when to be like, oh, it's okay." Like I just hung some picture frames in my apartment the other day and I tried to space them out evenly and like they're definitely not spaced like fully
No,
evenly. And I don't care. Like I just
who
left them there. I
cares?
was like, like they're like half an inch off. I was like, whatever. You only notice if you stare at it. So I was like, no, I don't feel like a perfectionist. But I think that when you hear how people, like kind of like scholars in this space define it, it's like, wait a minute. And Brene Brown actually defined it. She's a really big author, if anyone has not heard of her. But Brene Brown defined it as perfectionism is not the same thing as striving to be your best. Perfectionism is the belief that if we live perfect, look perfect, and act perfect, we can minimize or avoid the pain of blame, judgment, and shame, which is crazy to think about. Like, because I feel like, especially as like ambitious women in general, we relate to that so much of we don't want people to judge us. We don't want to feel embarrassed. We don't want to feel shameful. We don't want to feel like awkward, or especially when we're putting ourselves out there and trying new things. Like we don't want to feel that. But then we put that pressure on ourselves to have everything go perfect. And so we wear that perfectionism as an armor so that, okay, we can protect ourselves and hopefully never be criticized or rejected or to never ever feel like we're not enough. Because if I just do everything right, then I never have to feel those things. But it does end up really blocking us in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it requires you to be vulnerable, and perfectionism is a way to like avoid being vulnerable. And it's interesting because when we think about, I don't know, I feel like I've always thought about myself as an ambitious woman, but I don't always think that this has been true for me. So it's like interesting to think back on my life, like when actually did this become a thing? And I honestly think it wasn't until my adult life because of the fact that the school system kind of forces you to like act anyway. Like a lot of, at least for me, perfectionism leads to inaction. You don't do
Mm.
anything because you're just worried about it being perfect. You're worried about people placing blame or shame or whatever on your actions, so you just don't do anything. But when you're in school, like if you have a presentation and you don't feel ready for the presentation, you still have to get up in front of the room and speak. And I think it
Mhm.
puts that kind of like exposure therapy ingrained in you because you're acting on something every single day in school. But then as an adult, especially as ambitious women that are trying to like do our own thing, we really have to take the agency to go after the things that we want. People aren't forcing us to do it. So we get just kind of like used to not taking any action at all. So it's so interesting.
It is. It is. And that kind of goes into what we're going to talk about next, which is the 5 types of perfectionism. And this is something that audiobook I mentioned started to talk about. And this is what really shifted my understanding of perfectionism, because I didn't, first of all, I didn't realize there was types. I thought it was just like you're a perfectionist, you want everything to go right and to go well, but there are actually different types, and how they manifest and how people respond and behave are actually very different. So just kind of, we're going to just kind of list them, kind of go through them rather quickly, but just listen to them and just kind of like see if any of these resonate with you. But number 1 is a classic perfectionist. This is someone who is the planner. They are not spontaneous. They're always ready with a backup plan, and they like structure, order, and control. The second one is an intense perfectionist. They're the high achiever with a short fuse. They express anger when feeling overwhelmed and impose standards on those around them. They're driven, very all or nothing, and hold others to the same bar they hold themselves to. Then there's the Parisian perfectionist. They're the relational one, focused on connection and belonging. Their perfectionism shows up around relationships, image, and the need to be liked or seen a certain way by others. Then there's the messy perfectionist. They're the starter, but not the finisher, full of ideas and enthusiasm at the beginning of a project, but they tend to lose steam or get scattered partway through. And their perfectionism shows up as a difficulty to follow through rather than tidiness. And the last one is a procrastinator perfectionist. They're the waiter. They procrastinate because they wait for conditions to be perfect before starting, and conditions are never perfect, so the project keeps getting delayed. And the key with this, like a note on this, is that, which the book also talks about, perfectionism can either be adaptive or maladaptive. Adaptive perfectionism is when you have high standards with flexibility and self compassion when you fall short. You're like, I want these things to go well. I strive to be high achieving. But when things don't go well, maybe I make a mistake, I fall short. I'm really self compassionate. And I also like know when to let go. I know when to be like, okay, I've waited too long. I need to just take action on this. Maladaptive perfectionism is when you have high standards coupled with harsh self criticism, fear of failure, and an all or nothing thinking. That's when it's harmful. So there's adaptive and maladaptive. And I think that's really helpful to think about because one thing that the book talks about, and we'll talk about it as well later on in this episode, and that I was like, oh my gosh, this just like shifted something in my brain. Oftentimes, when you're a perfectionist, people tell you, stop being a perfectionist, let it go. It's like when you're, I don't know, crying about something and people are like, oh, stop crying. Oh my gosh, wow, I feel so much better. You know what I mean? It's like, shut up. That does not help me in any way to just say, stop being such a perfectionist. Okay, that's not helpful. And what the author kind of talks about is that you don't need to stop being a perfectionist. You just need to learn how to make sure that your perfectionism becomes adaptive and not maladaptive. If it's maladaptive, your life's going to be full of fearing failure, being really self-critical, having a lot more stress and pressure on yourself than is necessary. So that doesn't sound fun, right? It's like, but you're likely, if you are a perfectionist, you've likely been that way for a long time. It's not something you're just going to get rid of overnight or that you need to get rid of overnight. You just need to learn how to shift it to be something that's actually helpful and useful. So I think that with those 5 types, that's an important distinction to make, is that all of them can kind of be adaptive or maladaptive.
I also really like breaking this out with the 5 types because I think it's easy for people to look at this list and think that they're one of them. But if you actually take the time to like read through all of them and think about your life and think about like where things aren't going the way that you want them to go in your life and you can't explain why, I actually think that people probably relate to like 2 or 3 of them. For example, when I initially read this list, I was like, okay, I'm the messy procrastinator. Like I start things and get super excited about them and then I never follow through. Like they lose steam. I just kind of like let my ideas be sitting somewhere in my Notion doc halfway done and then they never see the light of day. It's easy for me to just say like, oh, that's how procrastination shows up in my life. But then when I actually like took a second glance at it, I was like, no, like the Parisian procrastinator, that's back to what I said about feeling afraid to speak my opinions and like vulnerable thoughts because I'm afraid of the way that people are going to perceive me. That's exactly that type. So yeah, I think that it's cool to like look at that list and look at all 5 and be like, no, there probably are bits and pieces that you can take away from each of them to make sure that you're not being maladaptive in either of these areas.
Right. I feel like I fall into 3 of them. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm definitely a mix of the Parisian, the messy, the procrastinator. I was like, I simultaneously wait to start things till the perfect time, but then I also start them and then I don't finish them. And then I worry about how other people are going to perceive me. So then I'm like, okay, we're not going to do anything at all. Or I'll like put something out and be consumed by anxiety and fear about how people are going to perceive it, that I'm like, I actually don't want to do that again. And it's like, I don't know. It is like helpful, like you said, to just kind of look at it and be like, where do I really fall into this? And I think if obviously listening to this, like, audibly and being like, hold on a second, I forgot all the names and what they all are. If you just Google like the 5 types of perfectionism, I think the book's called Perfectionist Guide to Losing Control. You'll find the list, and that, can help you kind of look at them more critically. But it's so worth it to look at the list and be like, what do I fall into? Because it helps you recognize your patterns more. But we're also going to talk later in today's episode too about how this perfectionism can actually manifest in your life in ways that you might not expect, and also how to kind of break the cycle and turn it into something that's adaptive. But we wanted to talk a little bit about why ambitious women specifically, like why is perfectionism something that ambitious women struggle with so much? And I think there's this like perception, how do I say this? There's a perception that perfectionism is negative and that, not like that women are doing too much, but kind of just that like ambitious women put too much pressure on themselves, which to a degree, yes, absolutely. But it's not like some of you woke up one day and were like, I want to be a perfectionist, like there are a lot of things that cause us to be perfectionists that have nothing to really do with us and more to do with the way that we're socialized. And that's something that I found really fascinating when like researching and preparing for this episode.
Well, yeah, because I think back to what I was saying earlier about thinking through my entire life and like when did this start to show up? I think that even though in school I probably did identify as an ambitious woman, I think that in the school system, you're still going with the grain. But as an adult, as an ambitious woman, you're probably trying to do something that's a little bit outside of the box, a little bit like outside of the norm. And through that, I think that that takes such a different level of vulnerability than it does if you're staying with the grain of like, okay, everybody in my graduating class went to corporate America and I'm also going to corporate America. And that's what I'm doing for my entire career. And my goal is to be management in corporate America, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying that it's with the grain. So you're probably not feeling this added sense of vulnerability that comes with trying to do something that most people aren't doing. And I think that that's where a lot of people can start to have these perfectionist tendencies because they are afraid of how people are perceiving them and they're trying to put themselves out there. They're trying to build something from nothing, create their own path. So I think that that's when these tendencies can start to show up.
Absolutely. I also think that I feel like there's a certain, everyone has a certain age and it's different for everyone. But I feel like there comes a time as women where all of a sudden we realize we're like, wait a second, there's a lot more pressure on women than there are on men. We start to be like, wait a second, why am I being looked at this certain way for doing something that this same, this guy did over here? Or why am I expected to, I don't know, come more prepared for something than my male classmate? Why am I held to certain standards that I feel like the men around me aren't? And this isn't to necessarily make it a man versus woman issue, but just to kind of enlighten people on how we are socialized. So we're going to get into three reasons why this is kind of, more prevalent in ambitious women. But first, I just want to share too that the actual research from the American Psychological Association shows that perfectionism is significantly higher in high achieving women than in any other demographic. So this is not just us being like, we feel like it is this way. Like the research literally backs that. So I just wanted to share that. But the first reason why perfectionism is more common in ambitious women is because of what's called, or like what we'll nickname the double bind, where women are evaluated more harshly than men for the same mistakes. Women learn early that the margin for error is smaller, so perfectionism becomes a rational response to an unwarranted standard. And that was, again, when I was researching this, I'm like, that is so interesting to think about because I did feel like that a lot growing up. I still do feel like that to this day. It's like you see, even on social media, I will see women partner with certain brands and get slammed with hate comments for it. And I'll literally go look at a man's video that partnered with the same brand and they get a fraction of the hate comments and so much more support. Or like men will do something online. You see like these crazy stories of how, of a woman and people will judge how she parents her kids in the comments with so much hate. And you see the father doing things, same thing, and does not get nearly as much hate. And I think that it's just interesting to think about because it made me realize I really did learn over time that there is a smaller margin of error, that I don't have as much wiggle room as other people do to make a mistake. So I try to avoid mistakes at all costs. And I think I don't know, it's interesting to think about that there's this misconception that we come out the womb just like a perfectionist when a lot of it is actually we learned from the world that we have to be a certain way or we're gonna, be judged or whatever.
Yeah, and I also think when it comes down to the smaller margin of error, I feel like I started noticing this in my very first corporate job out of college when I was looking for the first time at like, okay, what does my career actually look like for the next 5 to 10 years? And I started feeling that pressure of, okay, well, at some point children are probably going to be in that mix. And then you start thinking like, okay, well, now I have this career pressure to accomplish what I want to accomplish, to move up the career ladder, to do accomplish X, Y, and Z career goals before that takes place, which, yes, obviously you have a career after children too. That's totally possible. But it's kind of this, it feels like this halt in your progress where you feel this pressure to accomplish things before that, where men do not have that literally at all. Like, yes, men have children too, but I don't think that they think about like a break in their career or a halt in their progress with children the way that women think about it. So I also think that back to this kind of like small margin of error premise, like we do tend to be perfectionists because we think we have to move up faster or accomplish things quicker because a lot of us want to be parents.
There's a lot of pressures on that. Yeah, for sure. I think also too the second reason is this socialization and good girl conditioning. And this is interesting because for some reason kind of idea of like good girl conditioning used to make me feel like uncomfortable. I was like, I don't know that I've ever really felt that way or like related to that or whatever. But it's like you really start to think about it. And it's like from childhood, many women are praised for being good, compliant, and correct, not for being bold, experimental, or wrong, which is, I used to be a preschool teaching assistant and I worked with young kids for a few years. And it's interesting because you would see that, like you would see little boys being praised for certain things that girls weren't. And not that it was like ever intentional, like, but it's just how we like a lot of times our conditioning that ends up coming out and how we interact with kids. And it's like, I don't know, it's like you really are taught that from such a young age. There's this psychologist, and she's a Stanford psychologist. Her name is Dr. Carol Dweck. She's also an author of this book called Mindset and she says that girls are more likely to be praised for being smart, which is a fixed trait, rather than for effort, which creates a fear of failure that follows them into adulthood. And the result is a deep-seated belief that your worth is tied to your performance, which is so interesting because I think just from being like working with kids, I get videos on my feed of parenting like tips and advice.
Same.
And I always I
Alex and
always
I
watch
send
them.
them back and forth with each other.
Yes. Yes. I'm like, and I want to be a mom. So I literally have a folder on my Instagram. It's called Mom Life. And I like save them there so that one day I can go back and reference them. But I will see these videos about like of parents who use more like gentle parenting approaches, which is more of like my belief system. And they will like not when their kids like playing with blocks and stuff, right? Like they won't interrupt them. They won't say, good job, great, whatever. They'll let them just focus. And then they'll be like, wow, like that was a lot of effort. That was amazing. Rather than like, you're so smart, you're so talented, whatever. And it's interesting because then I like follow a lot of these creators. I see, how their kids develop. And it's just interesting to think about how we were raised in our generation and how kids are being raised now and how it is different. And just like the way that you're spoken to and praised for certain things makes such a difference. Because, yeah, when you really think about it, yeah, your effort is, or whether you're smart or not, is like kind of a fixed thing. Yes, you can acquire more, like, read more books, get smarter, whatever. But things like your effort is something that you can try. You can either put effort in or not. And so it's like when you're thinking about what actually helps people's worth not feel like it's tied to whether they are good enough or not. I don't know. Yeah, it's just interesting to think about how we're raised.
I've never really thought about this growing up either because obviously when you're in the thick of it, like I'm only a woman. I didn't get the experience of growing up as both a man and a woman. So like
Yeah.
I don't know. But I was thinking about this the other day because Alex and I, we have conversations around parenting all the time. Obviously, we do want to be parents at some point. And he will say things like dads have to be so hard on their boys growing up. And like young boys really do need to like fall down and scrape their knees and like try things and fail. Like that is kind of and I'll say to him, like, no, girls need that too. Like
Mm-hmm.
our daughters will need that as well. And I think that that's so important. But I do think that that's how the difference is between raising boys and girls for a lot of people is they think that they need to be either tougher on the boys or they need to like let them fall down and scrape their knees and learn from it and try new things and girls need that too. But I do think to our point like the socialization is not like that in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
cases. So it is just interesting. All of this is to say like how this manifests into being an ambitious woman today and our desire for perfectionism. But the last one we wanted to cover here is around like visibility and judgment, which is a lot of what we've been talking about. Ambitious women, when we're, building businesses, creating content, leading teams, you're really putting yourself out there and you're trying to be visible. But the more visible that you are, the more exposed you feel. You're going to feel vulnerable. And the perfectionism is the brain's attempt to control how you're perceived, which is crazy. And that's definitely something that I've been struggling with over the last couple of years.
Yes. And I think too, I want to emphasize it's crazy to think that this is how it's our brain's attempt to control perception, which really has nothing to do with us. It's not our brain's attempt to make us feel, how do I say this? It's not our brain's attempt to like remain in control. It's trying to control perception, how other people perceive us. Which is literally impossible. You can't, I mean, you can, I guess it's not impossible. You can do things. You can just be boring and bland and never state your opinion that may be controversial or whatever. But the truth of the matter is people are going to perceive you no matter what you do. Like, yeah, you can be less controversial so that you're not ever perceived as a controversial person and get more hate or whatever it may be. But you cannot control at all how people perceive you because you're not in their brains. You can't do that. So our brain is so fixated on trying to control other people's brains, which is, it's just like crazy to think about that because it's just like actually impossible, but yet we're wasting so much brain space on it. And
This
I think,
creator, before we move on from this creator that I follow, her handle is Omni Barnum. I think you
mhm,
follow her too,
yeah.
Grace, but she posted a video yesterday that I really loved. She was talking about a common trait that she sees in a lot of the most successful women. I think she used like Michelle Obama, Alex Cooper, and someone else. I forget who the third person. Oh, the founder of Bumble. She was like
Mm,
originally at Tinder and then she founded the competitor Bumble and became like wildly successful. And she said that one of the common traits that she noticed that most successful women have is they don't have a fear of disappointing people. And
mm,
I think that that's so interesting. Like, I do think that I know I struggle with this, and I'm sure a lot of ambitious women do too. Like, you do feel like you are either going to disappoint someone or let someone down, or if you're in the social media space, someone who's been following you for so long is going to disagree with a take that you have and then they're going to be disappointed in you, or just something like that. And I think that we're so hyper aware that that's a possibility that we become like muddled down and we're afraid to put
mhm.
ourselves out there and we're afraid to state our opinions or go after the business that we want because in some way you're afraid of disappointing someone in your life.
Absolutely. Which is a good transition too into the section we want to talk about how perfectionism actually shows up in your life. And I think there are very obvious ways and there are less obvious ways. And I think that a lot of times at least for me, when I was like really like listening to this book and researching and stuff, I was like, damn, the obvious ways I kind of picked up on, but a lot of the non-obvious ways, I was like, man, I didn't realize this was really how my perfectionism was manifesting. So, some of the obvious ways are just things like rewriting emails, captions, and messages until they're quote unquote right, delaying launching, posting, or starting until conditions are perfect, spending 80% of your time on 20% of the work that doesn't actually matter, and avoiding tasks that you might not immediately be good at. Like, all of those were like, okay, yeah, that's when I noticed my perfectionism showing up. But there are a lot of ways that we don't even realize that are perfectionism. Procrastinating is one. If you never finish, you can never fail. So you're like, okay, not starting is safer. That's just a perfectionism strategy. In relationships, holding yourself and others to impossible standards, having a difficulty apologizing because admitting fault feels catastrophic. This one was so interesting to me because I didn't think about how my perfectionism would maybe show up in relationships. And what is funny is my therapist, what she clocked me on with perfectionism was in relation to a relationship where I was seeing someone and we were up super late just talking till like 3 a.m. And then we go to sleep and he starts snoring. And I was
This
like,
story is so funny.
oh my
Grace
gosh,
already told me this.
I was having like an anxious day in my life. And so I'm literally exhausted. I'm like overstimulated. I'm so like just, fatigued. It's 3 in the morning. And we had just been up, like just chit chatting, whatever. So then I was like, I'm like ready to go to bed. In that moment when he started snoring, I need dead silence to sleep, by the way. I literally was like, I felt so irritable, right? Like so irritable. And then I started getting anxious because I felt so guilty and bad for the fact that I felt irritated by the snoring. And I was talking to my therapist about it. And I was literally like, just telling her kind of like the idea. I was like, maybe this is just something I need to work on. I need to work on being less irritable. I need to just like work on, maybe like showing up better for people and just not like letting things bother me. And she was kind of just like, she was like, doesn't that sound like awfully critical of yourself? And I was like, no. Like, I was like, no, it sounds very self reflective and like a growth mindset, like someone who values growth. She was like, Grace. And mind you, I talked to this like individual as well, like the guy that I was seeing. I was like, and he was like, no, I would have been like irritated too. Like, he was like, that's just a human emotion. But there I was in that moment holding myself to this standard of like, I will never, ever feel irritated ever with my partner. I will never feel annoyed by my partner. I will never, like, I will always just be light and airy and oh my gosh, you're snoring. Haha. Like this, I'm actually so tired. Do you mind just sleeping in the other room? Like No, that's just unrealistic. And I didn't realize how it would manifest, but then it led to me feeling shameful, guilty, very self-critical. So I think it's just interesting to think about how these things can show up too. Like I think we see it a lot in work, but it does translate into relationships as
Yeah,
well.
and how people are so different when it comes to because I don't think that this is something that I necessarily struggle with. I have like the exact same example. Alex and I were sleeping on an air mattress for like a month when we moved into this. Literally a month, we were
Which
sleeping on
is
an air
insane.
mattress because all of my furniture was still at the townhouse, and it was like fine overall. But you know how air mattresses like. One, it becomes a bouncy house when more than one person is on it. Like if someone gets out of the bed, like you're bouncing up and down. And then it's also so squeaky, like it's loud. And there was one night where
This is so funny. I love the story.
Alex got up in the middle of the night at like 1:30, and he like got up to pee, and then he like came back, and I don't know what he was doing, but he ended up getting up and down from this air mattress like it seemed like 50 times, which is probably an exaggeration, but for me who was sleeping it felt like 50 times. And he went to get up one more time and I was like, "Sit down." And I like yelled at him. I was so irritated. But like I was just like, yeah, I'm irritated. Like, this is so freaking annoying.
Right.
And then the next morning, I was like, yeah, that was so annoying. But I wasn't like feeling shame or guilt around
Right.
like being annoyed at Alex. Like, I was like, no, actually, that was just
Like
so
it just you
annoying.
pissed me off, like, and period. Yeah. No, it's funny because with like really looking at the different types of perfectionism and how they manifest and all of these things, I've realized it does show up in relationships for me a lot more than I thought, even friendships and even weirdly my relationship with God. Cause you guys know I'm a Christian. I've talked about it on the podcast where I will be like, well, did I pray for long enough? Or like, when I like prayed, did I like, maybe I should have like prayed longer or maybe that should have been more heartfelt or, or even in friendships, I will kind of think like, well, like I haven't been doing a great job of being there with my friends. I haven't there for my friends. I haven't texted this friend in 2 weeks, but it's like, it will literally be during a season where I'm going through my own really difficult thing. And it's like, Greece, it's not that you're holding yourself to an impossible standard that you stay super, super in touch with every single friend that you have, even when you're going through something on your own. Like that's just not possible. But then it causes me to like overthink and then push myself into this like, okay, well, like I view it as self-reflective and I'm realizing it's actually just self-critical where I'm like, oh no, I'm going to take this and then try to grow from it. And I think that ambitious women end up in that trap too a lot where it's like we get so self-critical and we try, like, how many self-help books have we read? You know what I mean? Like, you're not a project that you have to keep like fixing over and over. But I think sometimes when you hold yourself to such high standards that are nearly impossible, then you just start to think, I have high standards and I'm falling short. So I need to work on myself. And then you turn yourself into this never ending project that's just, it's not actually helpful. Like it's becoming maladaptive where you are enough where you are. Like, and you don't have to, I don't know, become a project. And for me, I see that a lot in my relationships.
Yeah, and I like that we are highlighting this one too, because I think when we hear perfectionism, we automatically assume it's related to work. And you think
Mm,
about, like, okay, well, what are the projects that I'm not starting? Or what am I being too critical on when it comes to my like work output? But it can affect so many other areas of our life as well. The next one is comparison. I think that this definitely shows up for a lot of people, but you might not
mm,
tie it back to perfectionism. It's just constantly measuring your work, your body, your life, your success against others as a way of assessing whether you're enough. And I also think, like, when it comes to comparison, judging how much action you should be taking or the types of action that you should be taking, and then just overthinking it. Like, I
mhm,
definitely do this too, where I'm in my lane, I'm feeling good. I'm like, okay, this is where I'm going. And then I see someone else doing something else, and I'm like, okay, now I need to do that too. And then I start judging myself where, well, they're doing that and they're finding success with it. So maybe I should be doing that too. And then you start overthinking, but it's like, it's your desire for this, like, to be a perfectionist where you can't stay in your own lane and like just be content staying in your own lane.
mhm. Going back to the definition of perfectionism that we talked about at the beginning, trying to be a perfectionist is just trying to protect yourself from any of those feelings of shame or criticism or not feeling like you're enough. So when you fall into this comparison trap, what your brain is basically doing is saying, well, let me go like look for evidence that I am enough. So then I will feel at peace, which is just you, again, being a perfectionist. So you go and you look at the views that someone else is getting on their video. You go and look at, you know, oh, is this person that I went to high school with? Like, where are they at in their career? You're looking at where's your ex-boyfriend at? What's your ex-boyfriend doing, right? And you're looking at all these things in order what your brain is really hoping for is to see that other people are either doing as well or worse than you so that you feel like you're enough and you think, oh, okay, cool, i I've met the standards, I'm actually in a good enough place. But then it's like, what happens when you don't find that evidence? And if your whole self perception is based on that evidence always being there, it's going to be really difficult. And this is something I've struggled with content creation, because the visibility and the numbers and the metrics of it, like your numbers are public to people. They can see how many views you're getting on your reels, whatever. And I've actually been in a season where like the last month, my content has not been performing well at all. And it's been very like demoralizing for me and very discouraging. And I have found myself sometimes like I'll be scrolling and I'll see a video and gosh, I'm like, this person has less followers than me and they're getting more views than me. And I'm like, I'm happy for them. I'm like, I love that for them. But then I'm finding myself almost being like, well, yeah, then maybe you're just not like meant to do this, or maybe you're just not really good at creating content or whatever. Because the thing is that evidence is not there. My brain wants to be able to see evidence that not that I'm wishing people are doing worse than me, but my brain is like, if I could just find a couple pieces of evidence that I am doing okay and that it's things aren't actually going poorly, I'll feel better. And that will kind of calm this perfectionist tendency to be doing exceptional. And I'll be like, okay, cool, I'm good. But that's not realistic. And we do it with everything. Girls do it with our body, our life, our everything.
And when you do find that evidence, I feel like your brain downplays it and only focuses on the evidence that people are doing better than you. Because I
Yep.
know, like, as a content creator, it is so normal to post a video and it get 200 views. Like, every single content creator, like, posts a video that gets very, very, not views, likes, like
Yeah.
200 likes on a video. Like, that's very normal. It happens to me all the time. A video just flops. But when you see that for someone else, you're like, "Oh, yeah, that's normal." So your brain kinda, like,
Mm-hmm.
downplays it, but when it happens to you, you compare your 200 like video to a 3,000 like video that somebody else posts, and you're like, "Everybody's doing so much better than me." So I feel like we
Yes.
tend to, like, downplay the evidence that people are exactly where we're at too, and, like, focus too much on, "Okay, what are people doing better than us?" And it leads us to that kind of, like, overthinking, procrastination, perfectionism that, "Okay, well, now I don't wanna post my next video because what if it's not perfect and it gets 200 views again?"
100%. Also, too, the last thing I'll say on this one before we go to the next one is comparison is like, and we've done an episode on this before, and definitely go listen to it if it's something you struggle with because it's such a good episode. But comparison is one of just like the biggest waste of time. It's a very stupid thing to do. And I say this as someone who does it like literally every day of my life. But I'm constantly reminded of how much we all compare our lives to each other and how much the reality of what we see in other people's lives is not the actual reality behind closed doors. Of course, I hope that every single couple that I see that is looks very happy on the outside is happy behind closed doors. However, the more people I meet, the more I'm like, "Oh my gosh, everybody's ish really does stank." Like I'll be friends with someone and the relationship looks totally perfect, and then all of a sudden I hear that their partner actually cusses them out every single time they have a disagreement. I'm like, whoa, okay. Or their partner cheated on them years ago, or, and they stayed with them, or whatever it may be. Or, you come to find out there are people that are traveling here, there, and everywhere all over the globe. And you come to find out that they actually, are not doing well financially. Or recently, I've kind of alluded to it a little bit because I don't want to talk about it online very much, but I've been going through a breakup and it's been so difficult. I just got a DM literally. I feel like the worst version of myself the last like month and a half. And literally a couple weeks ago, I get a DM from this girl. If you listen to the podcast, love you. This was so kind. And I was like, I needed to hear this. She was like, I just feel like you've absolutely been glowing lately. Like you just seem so happy. And I was like, I feel like the worst version. I'm like, guys, I have cried every single day for the last month and a half. I was just telling her before we got on every day. And that's normal. Okay. Going through a breakup, right? Like we've all been through it. But I'm like, it's just people could look at my stuff online and have no idea what I'm going through behind closed doors and be comparing it and be like, oh, Grace looks like she's living her best life. She looks like she's having so much fun when I'm actually in the trenches, of my life right now. It's just something that like comparison is just it does not lead you to a better place. It always is just going to lead you back into that loop of comparison. It's not useful. So,
Yeah, before we move on from that, I did want to add if you are searching for like that episode, or if you're ever listening to our podcast where you're like, oh, that's an interesting topic. I wonder if they've done an episode on it. We have literally like are we up to like 200 episodes or
I
something
think
crazy on the
150
podcast?
something, 60
Yeah.
something around
So
there.
we've probably done an episode on it. Now on Spotify, you can search terms within a podcast. If you click on our podcast page in Spotify and then you go up to the search bar, it'll say like search within this show. So now you can just type in like comparison and it'll take you directly to any episodes that we've done on that topic. I mean, even if it's not like directly in that topic, if it's in the show notes because we like quickly discussed it, it'll probably show up. So I just wanted to call that out because I feel like people will ask us like, oh, do an episode
Yeah.
on this. And we're like, no, we did. And it's like really
Yeah.
good. So definitely go listen to it. But
Yeah.
the next one, we were just talking about this before we got onto the show actually. Overworking, as in staying late, redoing work, never feeling done, not because the work requires it, but because stopping feels unsafe is totally, that's so relevant for so many people. I
Mhm.
definitely do that even when I had a really productive day and I finish everything that I need to do. If I'm not sitting on my computer for the hours that I feel like I should be sitting in front of my computer, I get so anxious and just feel like I'm not doing enough or I could be doing more. And yeah, I guess that that's a form of perfectionism.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like I think this one is such a super sneaky one because we view it as, oh no, I'm just really hardworking, and that's the case. Maybe you're a startup founder and you're like, yeah, I actually just have to work a lot right now in order to grow my company in the way I want to. But I think when it starts to become again maladaptive, where it's like, you know, sometimes I'll have a whole productive day and then I'll go cook dinner and I'll think to myself, well, you could edit this video while you watch TV. Like you could be doing this or you could be, it's like, what's the actual reason behind that? It's because not doing the work, I start to feel this like, oh my gosh, like what if something falls apart? Or what if like, maybe I should be doing more. And it's like, because it doesn't feel safe to just stop and relax and be in the moment. So I think it's something that can be adaptive, but it can be really sneaky when it's maladaptive, but something that I think ambitious women relate to a lot. The last two we'll kind of zip through. One of them is control, needing to manage every outcome, every perception, and every variable because uncertainty feels intolerable. Keyword here, uncertainty. That's something that I feel like ambitious women struggle ambitious perfectionists struggle with a lot. And the last one is related to yourself, which is striving to maintain a high degree of personal accountability, always feeling like there's a gap between your reality and your ideal and needing to fix that part of you. And I kind of talked about this one a little bit earlier as well in relation to relationships. But this one I thought was particularly interesting because I do find that really smart, ambitious women are constantly in this personal development loop. And it's interesting because obviously this is a personal development podcast. We want you to learn and grow, but again, in a way that's adaptive, not in a way that's maladaptive. We don't want you to come to these episodes every week and be like, I have to fix myself. So I'm going to listen to this podcast until I feel just enough, because that's not going to help, right? But I find that with a lot of my friends being ambitious women, I definitely have ambitious friends that are adaptive, and I feel like myself is more the maladaptive kind of perfectionist at the moment. And I have friends that are the same way, where it's almost like we become hyper self-aware and then hypercritical because we're holding ourselves to such high standards that we constantly feel like that project that we need to fix. And we view it as being personally accountable. We're like, no, like I'm just accountable for like when I make a mistake or when I do something wrong. And yes, take accountability when you make a big mistake, apologize when you need to. But there's also a line where it's no longer you just being accountable for the mistake that you made. It's you being self critical and trying to fix it because your hope is that you can get closer and closer to this ideal reality of yourself that does not exist.
I totally agree with this. I think back to the gap between yourself and the ideal image of you. I
Mhm.
think that a lot of ambitious women fall into a trap of, like looking on Pinterest and seeing
Mhm.
their ideal life on Pinterest and then feeling very hypercritical that their life doesn't look like that. I was just doing this last night. I was like scrolling on Pinterest and then that took me to like some cute fall outfits. And then I just like started saving an entire board of like fall 2026 outfits, which we love. I do that like every season. Okay, fine. But then I just started getting like very hypercritical and like anxious about the fact that like my style and like what I put on my body every day does not look like this Pinterest board. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these girls on my Pinterest board, their hair is so cute up in that claw clip and they look so like effortlessly put together. And like I don't look like that or feel like that in my day-to-day life. So then immediately I was like, okay, now what's my system for like how to fix that? And like how am I
Mhm.
going to like make my capsule wardrobe and like reduce decision fatigue in my outfit planning process? And like all of these like thoughts started going. I was like 10 o'clock at night last night. And like that's what I'm thinking. But I think that we do that so much in our life. We look at the ideal version of us and then we look at where we are right now and we're like, how do we fix it? And I think that that's why we end up in this system or this kind of like constant cycle of needing to like reset our life or like reset our, calendar and Notion board and reset every single aspect to make it this ideal like Pinterest version of ourselves, which it's not the reality. It's never going to be the
No.
reality.
And also too, gosh, when you see content on social media and on Pinterest, you have to remember, like, there are creators whose entire account is like the whole purpose of it is that their life is like extremely and unrealistically aesthetic. That's their stuff. They sell home decor or fashion or whatever it may be. They are selling an aesthetic. So yes, their entire life is going to look perfectly curated because that's what they do. That's their business or whatever. That's not normal. Like that is not it is I'm sorry, it is not normal to have your hair when you're making your coffee in the morning. Most people look like rats. I look like a rat when I make my coffee most of the time. I now like film my coffee routine or whatever, and I'll like put some makeup on when I'm getting ready. But when I'm making my coffee and I'm not filming, I look like I snuck on Earth. Most people
Correct.
are not waking up and have a claw clip with their perfectly curled hair and their matching set and their
And
cleanup set.
pajamas
No,
are wrinkly when you wake up and you're
my
not wearing a
gosh.
bra. So if
No.
anybody's filming their morning routine, you definitely do it later when you
Yeah.
can like, like throw your pajamas in the dryer to make them not wrinkled and like put a bra on so your nipples aren't out in your social media posts. Like it's not real.
Also, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, I have to say this. And I've definitely like, when I film my morning routines, I don't brush my hair before I do it because I'm like, this is how I look when I wake up. If you don't like it, watch
Yes,
somebody else. You know what I mean?
correct.
And I watch the content creators who do this type of content. So I'm not pointing fingers at them, but I am just saying it's very unrealistic. No one on this planet wakes up with a claw clip in their hair. They don't do that. And you know what people also don't do? They don't sit on the edge of their bed and do a light stretch in their matching set. No one does that. No one wakes up with a clock. So it's like, just remember when you're seeing that, again, it's fine for content creators. It
Right.
plays into the aesthetic. It's a good visual hook. People like watching it. And there's nothing wrong with that. However, when you're watching that kind of content or you're on Pinterest and you're looking at pictures of people, just remember these are things that people set up a camera to take a photo that are staged. These are staged things. And again, that's part of social media is making your content aesthetic enough because quite frankly, people don't really like necessarily seeing me with my ratty hair in the morning and my pajamas. It's literally my dad's sweatshirt from 15 years ago and a pair of sweatpants I've owned for 5 years. People don't like that as much as the aesthetic pajama matching
Hmm.
set claw clip nonsense. However, we start to compare ourselves. I find myself doing this ironically with, or weirdly enough, with recipes. I like to cook. I don't care really what it looks like when it hits the plate. I don't like, I'm not trying to, make it look fancy schmancy. And I'll see people do these what I eat in a day videos. I'm like, you really chefed up three full meals a day. To me, like my level of like cooking some days is like heating up the frozen shrimp. Like I'm not trying to make
1000%.
pasta from scratch, whatever, make the pizza. No, 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 no. I want to just reheat something is what I would like to do some days. And sometimes I'll judge myself and I'm like, Grace, they're a food creator. That's what they do. They do that all day. Hell, they probably didn't even make that dinner at 6 p.m. They probably made it at 4 p.m.
When the
And they
sun was
probably,
good and they
yes, when the
can.
sun, exactly. And you know what? I'm just like, it's,
Which
no,
again is fine. It's fine
it's
if you
totally
like creating
fine.
that type of content. If you're like,
Yes,
I love
yes.
consuming that
I
type of
love
content, but
watching
it's
it.
again just like it all goes back to the idea that like don't fall into this perfectionist tendency of feeling guilty that your life doesn't look like that or trying to fix your life so that it does look like that
Yes.
because it's not the reality.
And don't let this type of content inform what your ideal self or ideal reality looks like because it's just probably not it's not realistic. It's not that the fitness creators whose job is to go record their workouts, yes, they get to spend 3 hours at the gym every day. You don't. You work a normal job. You don't. You know what I mean? Like that's just, so don't be like, oh, like, I'm not getting enough like steps in. Babe, she has the whole day to go do that. You know what I mean? She has all day to get her steps in. She can use a walking pad when she's working. You work in a hospital. You can't use a walking pad when you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
just, I don't know. I just think it's important. But anyways, we're getting on a rant here. Let us know. Do you guys like our rants? Do you like when we just get on
I
like a
feel like
tangent?
everybody
You know what I
does. We
mean?
always get feedback that people like the rams or the rants. People say, please yap more. So we're trying to, but yeah, we
Yeah.
could go on for
Yeah,
hours
we could. But
sometimes.
anyways, we're going to talk a little bit about how to actually break the pattern. But first, we just want to talk about the cost of perfectionism because there is a massive cost. You lose opportunities because you procrastinate out of a desire for perfectionism. There's so much growth that you haven't experienced because you've been waiting to do something until you're quote unquote good enough. Relationships sometimes suffer because you can't tolerate being imperfect in front of someone else. There are dreams that have remained in your head because you're afraid to start without having enough knowledge. And also on top of that, just the anxiety, depression, burnout, etc. So again, we're not telling you to stop being a perfectionist. We're telling you to learn how to make it adaptive and not maladaptive. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to actually break the pattern. And before we get into this, I want to preface with I feel like I'm like becoming a salesperson for this book, but literally like 2 chapters in, and I was like, this taught me so much. I was literally listening to the book and then I was like writing things down on like a piece of paper and a sticky note because I was listening to it while I was doing some dishes and cleaning in my kitchen. And I was like, I had already done the entire outline for this episode. And I was like, no, I need to go back and redo a lot of this because I was like, this is so much more helpful than the stuff I had researched before. But the book talks about how perfectionists are not balanced people, and that's okay. Ambitious perfectionist women don't have to strive to let everything go and to do less. You just need to get to a place where it isn't maladaptive and making your life consistently worse. So the goal is not to just like wake up one day and be like, oh my gosh, I finally cracked the code. I'm no longer a perfectionist. It's to slowly shift from maladaptive to adaptive perfectionism. So again, kind of redefining maladaptive and adaptive in this situation. Adaptive would be where you're using your perfectionism as motivation without requiring everything to go perfectly or beating yourself up over failure. And maladaptive perfectionism would look like torturing yourself, trying to make everything perfect, but ultimately ending up disappointed because perfection isn't possible. So those are things to keep in mind as you're like, okay, if I'm going to work on this, do I feel like I'm shifting more towards adaptive or maladaptive? Paying attention to those things. So, number one thing to do to actually help you break the pattern is to check your perfectionism, which sounds like duh. But there's a quote from this book I thought was really good. And she said, perfectionism unchecked calcifies into its shadow side. So if you're not actually checking yourself, it's going to just start to turn into that like maladaptive perfectionism. An example of this is that the classic perfectionists are these highly reliable, consistent, and detail oriented people in a way, and that stabilizes their environment. But left unchecked, they struggle to adapt to spontaneity or a change in routine and can have difficulty connecting meaningful with others. So every single type of perfectionism, each type has a version that works for and against them. So checking yourself to see, okay, am I falling into that trap where my type of perfectionism is becoming maladaptive and not adaptive? You have to kind of pay attention to it and see if you can catch yourself in the moment. And I find people are like, well, how do I do that? I personally have found that whenever I choose to bring that to my conscious awareness, where I'm like, okay, this is going to be a priority for me to pay attention to, my brain catches it without me really even having to try. Like I'll do something and then I'm like that probably was not great, or like I'll do something and then a few hours later I'll be reflecting on my day and I'm like, oh, okay, I actually see where my perfectionism showed up. Or when I'm journaling at the end of the day and thinking through my day, I will be like, I see where I, maybe struggled to adapt to spontaneity here, or I, struggled with letting something wait before I did it, or stuff like that.
I love that. I also love number two, if you really want a system behind this. I feel like some people do love these systems where they can actually like consciously make an effort to do things despite of their perfectionism. And this is creating a tiered standard for your work, kind of like the good enough standard. So the idea here is to separate your work between three tiers. Tier one is where excellence is required. Tier two is where good enough is fine. And then tier three is where done really is better than perfect. And yes, like we could give you ideas for like what should be in each tier, but I feel like everybody's career is going to be so different. Ideally, tier one is more your kind of like public facing or like client relationship type of work. If you are a photography business, obviously you need your photos to be good and you need the editing to be good and you need to deliver on time. Like excellence really is required there. But there definitely are some tasks that, yes, they're needle moving, but not in the same way as that. Maybe if it's your photography business, having a consistent social media presence is a tier 2 task where yes, you want to have a social media presence, you want it to be good, you care about what it looks like, but it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be up to that same tier as the actual photos that you're producing for your clients. So really go through your tasks and assign them those tiers. And I think for the tier 3 and even some of the tier 2 work, I think that this is where it becomes very important to almost like not time block, but assign yourself an amount of time that you're going to focus on those things. Like if tier 3 is all of your admin work, give yourself an hour at the end of the day, maybe from the hour of like 4 or 5 p.m. if your business is your full-time thing. And that's going to be all of your tier 3 work for the day. And when that hour is up, all of the work has to be done. If that means it's
Mhm.
like you're doing it halfway or you're doing it like okay, that's fine because it's not actually needle moving. And then same thing with tier 2. If you give yourself 1 hour to like create and schedule your social media posts for your photography business, that's fine. Whatever it looks like is going to be fine. I think that we tend to lump all of our tasks with equal weight and then give yourself unlimited amount of time to do all of it. And that's why nothing gets done.
Absolutely. I also will sometimes, if I catch myself spending too much time, like I'm noticing, okay, I budgeted maybe an hour for this task and I'm an hour and a half in, I will sometimes pause and kind of catch myself and I'll be like, does this, like, I've kind of, subconsciously asked myself, is this a tier 1 task? Like what level of task is this? Like, does this need to be perfect? Does this need this much of my time? I find this with when I'm planning travel because I will endlessly research things. And I have started recently to just be like, okay, I'm going to give myself 1 hour. And at the end of that hour, I'm going to pick all the activities I'm doing on this trip because it doesn't need to be perfect. Me researching for a bajillion hours is actually not going to get me like a significantly better result. Yes, if I'm doing like a, really, really costly trip across the world, I'm going to put a lot of thought into what I'm doing. But when I'm going for a weekend, I'm going to Chicago this weekend. I'm going for a weekend away in Chicago. It's not like I am flying across the globe, right? If I go to Chicago and then I leave and I'm like, I kind of wish I did this thing. Okay, I'm 27. One day I'm sure I can go back. Like it is okay. And it's not a tier 1 task where I have to plan this one trip perfectly because I'm never in my life ever going to do it again. So I think that is a good thing to kind of help catch yourself in the pattern. Tactic number 3 is called the 85% rule. I feel like this is something that people have talked about a lot in relationship to perfectionism. And again, the key is it's not trying to get you to stop being a perfectionist. It's to help you recognize when it's starting to form into a maladaptive kind of strategy. So just want to preface that. But the idea is that aiming for 85% of your capacity produces better results than aiming for 100% because it removes the tension and self monitoring that perfectionism creates. So, in practice, before you send, post, or launch, ask yourself, is this 85% what I'm capable of? 85% of what I'm capable of. And if so, then you're done. The thing with this is, and kind of the theory around this in that last like 15% before you do something, because you're striving for perfectionism, you're often, like it says, more tense and more self critical. And that's where you tend to spend the most amount of time. So, perfectionists, like let's say you have like a whole project you're working on, the first 85% may feel pretty smooth and good. And when you get to that last 15% is where that perfectionism can start to come out. And that's where you can end up spending the most time on that last 15% because you're starting to feel more tense, the overthinking's coming out, you're starting to get into that maladaptive level of perfectionism, and that's when you can start wasting time. So that it kind of like the tier kind of structure, you can ask yourself when you catch yourself spending too much time on the last bit of a project, you can pause and ask yourself, is this 85% of what I'm capable of? And if the answer is yes, then you can say to yourself, okay, I'm starting to go into maladaptive perfectionism. Let me pause and say, let me look at the remainder of the project and ask myself, what needs to be perfect? What needs to be good enough? And what does really not matter? And then wrap the project up, according to that. But again, it's not to say that you have to, as a perfectionist, start putting everything out 85%. done. No, that's trying to get you to stop being a perfectionist at all. It's to try to help you catch yourself.
I also don't think it always has to be when you're 85% of the way done with the project. I think it's recognizing what would getting the project shipped at 85% capacity, what would that actually look like? For example, because a lot of people listening to this podcast do want to grow their business through social media. I was watching this Instagram reel the other day where this content coach was saying that she doesn't film with her back camera, she only films with her front camera despite a lot of people saying, oh, like the quality needs to be better. You need to film with your back camera. And she was basically saying that like the marginal quality benefit is not worth that 15% of overthinking. She didn't use that
Mhm.
exact percentage, but
Mhm.
that's the idea. It's like, okay, yes, you could sit there being like, well, my back camera has way better quality than my front camera. So I need this video to be 100% perfect and I need to film with my back camera. However, how much more are you overthinking that piece of content with that simple switch? Because now you need to be able to set it up in a way, you need to double check that you're in the frame. Maybe you're mirroring onto a different device to make sure that you're in the frame. There's so much more that goes into it rather than just propping up the camera, staring at yourself, and the quality is still going to be totally fine. So I think that that's a good way to think about it too. It's like, okay, how can I get this needle moving task done 85% of the way and it's fine? Whatever the end
Mhm.
result is, it's going to be fine and it's still going to move the needle.
Yes, and knowing what 15% to give up to I would say give up on, but to let go, because that again, that's adaptive, saying, "I've done this, it's good, and I know when to let it go because it's just becoming harmful to myself." Like you said, this person who's like, "It's not worth it for me to do that," because I find that when I do that, I go into overthinking mode, and then that's stopping me from even doing anything or putting content out. So that's gonna be the 15% that I choose to let go. This is something I have been really getting better at, I will say, over the years. Like with content, I used to always, like when I would vlog, if I didn't like how the angle of myself looked, like I would refilm it. Now I don't care. Like if it's an angle of myself where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like, my butt looks like a weird shape in this, I don't care. I just like literally don't care. I'm like, it just put it out. Or if I film a video and then I realize that I forgot to put concealer on my pimple, I'm not refilming it. I'm just literally going to post the video because it's, again, it's not worth it to me. That's the 15% that I can let go of. Okay. Number 4 on this list is know what perfectionism protects you from. So ask yourself, what happens if I fail? Because that will help you get to the root of what you're actually so afraid of. And then run through the scenario of what if that actually happens. Because 99% of the time, it's not as bad as you think. I've talked about this in the podcast so many times. But when you ask yourself what the best, worst, and most likely case scenario is, typically as a perfectionist, you're like, oh my gosh, okay, worst case scenario is everything falls apart, it goes to zero, everyone hates me, they perceive me as this awful person, nobody likes me, I end up totally alone, da 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 da. And then you're like, when you say it out, like say it out loud to yourself or write it down. When you say it, you're like, wait a damn minute. You're like,
Like
that's
that's
actually,
silly.
yeah, you're like that. What are the actual, I'm like a big numbers person that really helps me like bring my anxiety down and my overthinking. I will ask myself, what are the statistical odds of that happening? And it's like 0.0000. You know what I mean? It's some ridiculous number that it's like, why is my brain fixating on that? Again, it's because your brain is designed to help you protect yourself. So your brain catastrophizes the worst case scenario to protect you from whatever you're afraid of. And what's most likely is not the worst case scenario. And I think that's a really good thing to remember when you're kind of dealing with the perfectionism.
Yeah, and I think that that segues really well into number 5. This is literally the only thing that I added to this outline because, like I said, it was out for my wedding. But I was like, I think this is good to end on. It's rejection slash exposure therapy. At some point, you just have to do the dang thing. And I think that getting that exposure therapy allows you to get over that hump of thinking that everything is so catastrophic. Like if you are overthinking and being a perfectionist about your very first piece of content, okay, you need to challenge yourself to post every single day for 30 days. That's going to force you to put things out that are not 100% perfect. And it's going to show you and give your brain proof that, oh, yeah, I can like share my opinion online or like promote my business online or post my photography business online without the world ending and without these like catastrophic consequences like actually coming to fruition. I've talked about this before on the podcast, but that's what I did when I started posting content. And if I didn't do this, I never would have started my business online. I forced myself to post every single day for 60 days straight. And I was like, we'll see at the 60-day mark what happens. But if I didn't do that, I think that it would be easy to, okay, you have one video that flops. I suck at this. I'm never going to do it again. Or you have one video that does perform, but we all know how when it does start to perform, you get the mean comments. So then you
Mhm.
look at it and you're like, oh, I'm not cut out for this. I'm like so anxious about it. You have to give yourself enough proof that, okay, I did this for 60 days and it's totally fine. Nothing happened to me. The world is not ending. And that's really what people mean when they say either rejection therapy or exposure therapy.
Absolutely. And remind yourself too, I'm 27. Me exposing myself to my fear or pushing through my perfectionism one time or even 10 times, 20 times is not going to rewire 27 years of perfectionism. It's just not realistic. So it has to be something that you do continue to expose yourself to and push through countless times. Like it probably is going to take significant work. But when I was creating this outline, I really thought about what would it look like to only have adaptive perfectionism and not maladaptive. And I really thought about how much different my life would look. And I was like, damn, like that's actually like really, that would be a beautiful life, to be able to have high standards, but also know when to let go and to have, yeah, high standards for myself, but also have a lot of self compassion and to feel less pressure on myself to show up to work and be like, oh, that video flopped, but you know what? I really liked it. So I don't care. Like that would make my life so much better that it is worth putting in the effort to figure out how to shift my perfectionism from maladaptive to adaptive. And like that's worth it. It's worth taking the time to expose myself to things, not just 5 times, but 50 times to really shift from, a lifetime of perfectionism to a future. And I actually thought about this yesterday when I was in the car and I was thinking about all the things I had to do today and I was thinking about this episode. I was like, you know what? God willing, I have like 70 more years on this planet. Like, do I want to spend the 70 years I have being a perfectionist in a maladaptive manner? No. So, yeah, I'll take a year to really work on it so that I can have 70 more that are a lot better. Like that, when you really put it in perspective that way, that I was like, yeah, that's so motivating to me because it can feel kind of defeating of like, great, I have to expose myself to things so many times or really work on this for a long period of time to rewire this lifelong perfectionism that I have. But we have so many more years left on this life, guys, or on this earth, It's like it's worth it to put in the work to live the rest of your life in a much more peaceful way.
I totally agree with that. I also really loved this episode, and I have a feeling that you guys will too. You guys have been loving our like why ambitious women struggle with XYZ. We've done, I think this is our third episode of it now. So let us know in Spotify what else you would like to hear us cover for this series. Some of the other ones we've done are true productivity. We did that one.
Mhm.
I forget what the other
I
one
think
was,
this
but
might be our second
oh,
one.
maybe this is our
Yeah.
second one. Yeah, but we wanna turn this into a recurring series where
Yeah.
we're maybe, like, every month sharing one thing that ambitious women tend to struggle with and then giving our thoughts, opinions, diving into the research on it. So let us know in Spotify what else you would love to hear us talk about on the podcast. But if you're still tuning in at this point, you're a real one because we've officially yapped for an hour and 10 minutes. But with that, thanks for tuning into the podcast, and until next week.